So the reputation system in Star Wars Outlaws is looking like it's going to be an enormous part of the game, and with it comes 5 major crime syndicates that we are going to be able to interact with, at least most of them anyway, in order to change our reputation and slightly alter our path throughout the game. Today I wanted to go over all 5 of these crime syndicates so that you guys know everything you need to know heading into the underworld of Star Wars Outlaws. Now, to quickly get them out of the way, the 5 syndicates that are confirmed as of right now for Star Wars Outlaws are the Hutt cartel, Crimson Dawn, the Pike Syndicate, Ashiga Clan, and Zerek Besh. And like I said, most of those are going to be able to be interacted with, the only exception to that being Zerek Besh. And I will get to that in a little bit and explain why we actually cannot interact with them, because they are a major part of the story. Now, starting off with easily the most famous of the cartels or the syndicates that I just mentioned, this is the Hutt cartel. And if you've watched anything to do with Star Wars, I'm sure you guys absolutely know who this is. These guys are essentially the biggest crime syndicate in all of Star Wars, and they are run by Jabba the Hutt, who is obviously one of the most famous characters in Star Wars in general. Now, although there are other players pulling strings behind the doors for the Hutts, Jabba is generally the face of the Hutt cartel. It's essentially him and his family who are running this big crime syndicate, but like I said, he is essentially the face of the cartel, and he is someone we definitely don't want to mess with. Now, the Hutts are primarily placed on Tatooine throughout this game, although it does look like they may be in some other locations too. We have seen some gameplay that I'm not really sure what planet it's on. It could potentially be Tatooine, but there is a little bit of greenery going on, and obviously that is not something that goes hand in hand with Tatooine. It is generally just a barren, sandy planet. So there is a chance that the Hutts are in other locations, but even if they are going to be predominantly shown on Tatooine because that is essentially their home planet. Now, of all the crime syndicates in Star Wars Outlaws, and realistically just all the crime syndicates in Star Wars in general, the Hutts are easily the most prominent. They are the most well-known. They are most likely the most powerful. And on top of that, they kind of rule by show of force and strength rather than hiding in the shadows. Now, obviously, the setting of this game is right during the peak of the original trilogy, and that does mean, obviously, the Empire is a little bit distracted with what's going on with Luke and the Rebels. That's essentially going to be taking place off screen while we're playing Star Wars Outlaws. Now, because of that, it does mean that the Hutts are going to be kind of at the peak of their power because there is a lot less Empire control that they need to worry about, and I'm interested to see just how powerful they are in this game. Now, with that being said, the Empire didn't tolerate lawlessness during this period of the Star Wars story, but they also weren't very harsh on the Hutt cartel, as the Hutts played a very important role in the Outer Rim's economy, and so they often let things slide. We've seen that a lot in Star Wars, whether it's in the movies and shows or even just in the comics. They were fairly lenient on the Hutt cartel. It was almost like there was some level of mutual respect there. Not quite an alliance, but the Empire didn't just shut down every single thing that the Hutt cartel was doing. I'm curious to see if we see any familiar faces from the movies, for example, Boba Fett or even Chrysanthemum, who we saw in the Book of Boba Fett. These guys were obviously very heavily linked with the Hutt cartel. They often worked for them, and so it's going to be interesting to see whether any familiar faces show up throughout the game, especially if we do become wanted by the Hutt cartel. Now, next up we have another very famous syndicate, and this is Crimson Dawn, led by Kira from Solo's Star Wars story. Now, before Kira, Maul was actually the leader of Crimson Dawn until he died at the hand of Obi-Wan, which wasn't all that long before Star Wars Outlaws takes place. And at that point, Kira essentially took the title of Lady Kira, and she did become the leader. Now, a little fun fact about Crimson Dawn is that in the War of the Bounty Hunters comic line, Crimson Dawn actually stole Han Solo when he was frozen in carbonite and auctioned him off, with Jabba the Hutt paying 1 million credits to retain his trophy of Han Solo at his palace. So there is going to be a little bit of bad blood there potentially between Crimson Dawn and the Hutts, with Jabba pretty much having to pay up to get the trophy that he initially wanted for free. And on top of that too, the Crimson Dawn are very much anti-Empire. They are not quite like the Hutts where there's that level of mutual respect there. Crimson Dawn essentially hates the Empire. Kira actually had some plans, albeit not the most logical of plans, that she wanted to overthrow Palpatine and Vader and have Crimson Dawn essentially control the galaxy. So there is a little bit of bad blood there, and I'm interested to see if that actually plays into the story at all. That would definitely be pretty cool to see. Now, before we go any further, if you guys are new to the channel and you are interested in more Star Wars Outlaws content, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications. There is plenty more content on the way, so make sure you don't miss out. Now, next up we have the Pike Syndicate, who are obviously a very common name throughout the Star Wars universe. As far as I know, it is actually unknown who their overall leader was during this time period, as both Lon Pike and Fife, the two leaders that we've known of so far, were both killed during the Clone Wars, and Key Tolsite was also killed on Kessel during the events of Solo: A Star Wars Story. So as far as I know, there is actually no canon leader during this time period for the Pikes. We are obviously going to find that out in this game because we know that they will obviously have a leader, but as far as we know right now, we don't know who that leader is. Their leader in the Book of Boba Fett was actually unnamed as well. We never learned that guy's name, and it doesn't look like the same leader that we have in this game. So even if we did know that guy's name, that isn't actually a guarantee that it's the same person. He does obviously have a scar on his face in Outlaws, so it could potentially be the same guy. I can't actually remember if he lived through Book of Boba Fett. It's been a while since I've watched that, but regardless, it is going to be interesting to find out who their leader is. Now, the Pikes were mostly known as spice runners. They had a bit of a monopoly on the spice trade, and that is essentially where their power came from. The Pikes are very much enemies with Crimson Dawn. It's even mentioned in Solo: A Star Wars Story that they do have a fragile relationship, and I think that kind of stemmed from the fact that once the attack on Kessel happened during that movie, they probably found out that that was done at the order of Crimson Dawn, and that's probably where the downfall of their relationship started. It's being said that in this game they are going to have a large presence on Toshara, as well as potentially other locations too. I don't think they're going to be just on Toshara, but that is mostly where they're going to be seen, and I dare say we're going to be spending a lot of time on Toshara. Now, next up we have the Ashiga Clan, and this is a clan that's actually been made by Massive Entertainment for this game. So we have never seen Ashiga Clan before. They've never been mentioned in any other previous Star Wars content. Much like the planet of Toshara, they have been made up entirely for Star Wars Outlaws. Now, the Ashiga Clan is based on Kijimi, so that's mostly where we're going to see them. And from what we know, they do tend to keep to themselves a lot more than the other syndicates do. So I have a feeling they are going to be pretty much solely on Kijimi. I'd actually be kind of shocked if we see them anywhere else. I don't think they were that big of a player in this whole story compared to the likes of the Hutts and the Pikes and stuff like that. So I dare say these guys are going to be almost exclusively on Kijimi. Now, similar to the Pike Syndicate, they're all the same species. Obviously, when we look at the Hutt cartel and Crimson Dawn and stuff, those are just groups of different species and stuff. Lots of them are human, lots of them are different alien species, whereas with the Pike Syndicate and now with the Ashiga Clan, they are actually just all the same species. And this species actually doesn't have eyes, so they use different senses to see and feel what's around them. A lot of the design of Kijimi is done with this in mind. The Ashiga Clan has essentially put a lot of tactile markings on the ground and stuff like that to allow them to know exactly where they are. It's almost like a little railroad system where they can kind of follow along these tactile markings to get from point A to point B, which I thought was pretty damn interesting. Now, last but definitely not least, we have the Zerek Besh, and unlike the rest of these syndicates, these guys aren't really interactable, meaning that we can't increase our reputation with them and stuff like that, because the Zerek Besh are essentially our main enemies in this game, led by Sliro, who is the main antagonist, and a large part of the story is going to focus on not only him, but Zerek Besh in general, meaning we can't obviously have a good reputation with our main enemies in the game. Now, we don't know too much about the story, but we do know that Sliro has placed a death mark on Kves, which I'm sure we'll learn about very early on in the story, probably in the first hour or so. And so the Zerek Besh will no doubt be a constant threat looming over us throughout the entire game, as with that death mark, they are obviously hunting us down to try and kill us for a reason that we are kind of yet to know, as Ubisoft is obviously trying to keep some of that stuff a little bit secret. Zerek Besh is based on Cantonica, which is obviously where Canto Bight is that we see in The Last Jedi. And for those who didn't know, this is actually where Kves grew up. So there's going to be some sort of backstory here. We have seen little bits throughout trailers where we see like a young Kves. I'm going to assume that it has something to do with that as to why Sliro wants her dead. So I think most of this story is going to take place on Cantonica. I'm not too sure they'll have too much of a presence elsewhere, except for in those key story moments or in moments where they are essentially hunting us down on other planets. But that is it for all 5 of the crime syndicates that are confirmed to be in Star Wars Outlaws. I'm keen to hear all of your thoughts on this whole crime syndicate situation, as well as just the reputation system overall, and let me know which of these syndicates you are the most excited to see in Star Wars Outlaws. But with that being said, thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and may the Force be with you always.